Have you ever wondered if a country, one that looks rich and prosperous on the surface, could actually be um, heading towards a situation where its own people feel poorer? It sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? But that's exactly the question we're digging into today. We're unpacking insights from Australia's economic challenges and potential solutions. And our mission for you listening is to help you quickly get a handle on why some critics are pretty concerned about where Australia's economy is going. We'll look at the warning signs, think about what might happen if things just stay the same, and importantly, explore if there's actually a way out. Okay, so let's get into it. The sources point to several big reasons for concern. And the first one, wow, it really stands out. This huge reliance on real estate.
Yeah, it's the scale that's striking. You've got over 70% of Australian household wealth tied up in property. That's, well, way higher than most other developed countries.
70%, that's huge.
It is. And while property does add to GDP, through construction, lending, various fees, the key thing our sources stress is that it's largely unproductive.
Unproductive how? Compared to what?
Compared to things like manufacturing or developing new tech, property often just recirculates existing money rather than creating genuinely new economic value that you can, say, export or build upon.
And it creates this nightmare scenario for affordability, right? The sources mention these, frankly, eye-watering price-to-income ratios. Sydney at 12 times average income, Melbourne at 10.
Exactly. Those are among the highest globally.
So for you, the listener, maybe trying to get into the market,
Yeah.
what does a ratio like 12 times income actually mean day to day?
It means immense pressure. It's not just a number. For a young person, it can feel like that dream of owning a home is just slipping away. And there are real knock-on effects highlighted in the reports. Less money left over each month, disposable income squeezed. It can even impact decisions about starting families, lower birth rates because it's just so expensive.
Yeah.
And it hits intergenerational mobility hard. Makes it tougher for the next generation to do better than the last.
Okay, so that's the property piece, tying up capital. But it also connects to another major point in the sources, Australia's really low productivity growth,
That's right.
which is supposed to be the engine of long-term wealth, isn't it? The reports say Australia's had one of the weakest productivity performances in the OECD since about 2010.
Yeah, it really begs the question, if growth isn't coming from productivity, where is it coming from?
And the answer seems to be
Population expansion, mostly. The sources are pretty clear. Australia's been getting bigger, adding more people, but not necessarily richer per person or more efficient.
so growing bigger, not necessarily smarter or more efficient.
Kind of. It masks a sort of underlying stagnation in actually producing more per hour worked. And when you look at the OECD context, these are generally the advanced economies. It really shows Australia lagging. We see examples in sectors like education, health, construction. Very labor-intensive, but not showing big jumps in productivity.
And that reliance on population growth, just bringing in more people to keep the headline numbers up, leads straight to the next point, immigration. Some sources almost call it an economic crutch, especially now, with record net overseas migration, over 500,000 arrivals in 2023-24 alone.
And while that definitely boosts headline GDP, makes the overall economy look bigger, and supports housing demand,
There's a but.
there's a big but. It absolutely masks those underlying weaknesses we talked about. The sources flag serious issues: infrastructure struggling to keep up, the housing crisis getting worse, falling GDP per person, meaning the average slice of the pie is shrinking, and potentially growing social friction too.
So immigration has benefits, obviously, but the way it's being used here might be problematic.
The argument in the sources is that when it's mainly boosting aggregate numbers without matching gains in productivity or the infrastructure to support it, the actual benefit per person starts to dwindle.
Okay, so low productivity, growth fueled by population. How does this hit the average person's wallet? The sources mention falling real wages and living standards.
Yeah, that's the direct impact. Real wages, so wages adjusted for inflation, have basically flatlined or even gone down for many since around 2013.
Ouch.
And at the same time, the cost of essentials, energy bills, rent, food has been rising much faster than incomes. Plus, it's not just wages. The reports talk about widespread underemployment, people wanting more hours but unable to get them, and lots of part-time work. This hits young people and recent migrants particularly hard. It creates a real squeeze.
In adding to this picture, the sources point to a kind of hollowing out of Australia's industrial base. Decades of deindustrialization, right?
Right.
Like losing car manufacturing.
Yes, and very little presence in things like semiconductors or other advanced tech manufacturing.
So what's left?
Well, the sources observe the economy has become really heavily reliant on just a few things. Services, mining, and as we discussed, real estate. It's a stark contrast if you look at places like the US or South Korea with these really strong, diverse tech sectors. That lack of diversity makes Australia more vulnerable.
Speaking of vulnerability, dependence on China and commodities comes up a lot. China buys, what, over 30% of Australian exports? Mostly iron ore and coal.
That's the figure. And the critical question becomes geopolitical risk. It's like putting a lot of your economic eggs in one basket. It may be a volatile one at that.
How so?
Well, you've got geopolitical tensions simmering. Things like a UK, that security pact with the UK and US, differing views on Taiwan, the general US alliance. These could all potentially lead to trade friction down the line. Plus, commodities themselves are inherently cyclical. Prices go up, prices go down. If demand drops or prices tank, Australia is really exposed.
Okay, and then there's debt, household debt. The sources flag Australia's household debt to GDP ratio as one of the highest in the world, around 120%. Is that uniquely bad or just high?
It's the sheer scale that's concerning. Yes, other developed countries have debt, but Australia is way up there. It was largely fueled by that property boom we mentioned, helped along by years of really low interest rates.
But rates aren't low anymore.
Exactly. Now rates are rising and rising fast. That means a lot of homeowners are facing serious mortgage stress. It's not just an individual problem. It dampens consumer spending across the board.
And one last major challenge mentioned, the aging population. By 2050, nearly a quarter of Australians could be over 65.
That's the projection. And economically, that means a shrinking workforce relative to the number of retirees.
Which translates to,
Lower tax revenues coming in, higher costs for healthcare and pensions going out, fewer workers supporting more non-workers. It's a big demographic headwind.
wow, okay, that's a lot of interconnected challenges. So if we try to connect the dots, what are the key signs, the indicators flashing right now that signal this economic strain?
You can boil it down to a few key things we see in the data.
Hmm.
Negative or basically flat real wage growth, weak productivity growth, that incredibly high household debt, falling home ownership rates, especially for younger adults, a really small manufacturing base compared to GDP, and maybe most tellingly, falling GDP per capita since 2022.
GDP per capita, that's the average economic share per person, right? So even if the whole economy grows, the average person's slice is shrinking.
Precisely. Even if the total pie gets bigger because there are more people, the average slice is smaller. These are all, pretty clear warning signs according to the analysis.
Okay. That paints the current picture starkly. Let's do that thought experiment you mentioned. What if nothing changes? What if Australia just keeps going down this same road?
Well, the sources sketch out a pretty grim potential future. Housing likely keeps getting more expensive, making inequality worse, maybe depressing birth rates further. Continued mass immigration, without the infrastructure to match, could see cities really struggle under the strain.
Makes sense.
That huge debt burden could lead to more defaults, people stop spending, consumption slows right down, a commodity price crash or serious trade issues with China. That could tip the country into recession. And another risk, talent drain.
Yeah.
Skilled people might just leave if it's too expensive to live well and opportunities seem limited elsewhere.
That sounds bleak. The sources talk about maybe a Japan-style stagnation, or that phrase used earlier, rich country with poor people.
That's the potential endgame described, yes. A situation where the headline numbers look okay, maybe, but the lived reality for many citizens is one of stagnation or decline.
Okay, deep breath. Is there a way out? Please tell me the sources say yes.
They do. The answer is yes, but it requires some pretty bold reforms. It's not about tinkering around the edges.
Okay, like what? What kind of bold reforms are we talking about?
Well, first up, tax reform, specifically targeting property speculation, trying to redirect investment towards more productive areas.
Makes sense given the earlier points. What else?
Second, serious investment in advanced manufacturing and tech R&D. Really diversifying the economy away from just digging stuff up in housing, building new industries. Third, tackling housing affordability head-on. That means things like zoning reform to allow more housing density and embracing new building methods like 3D printing or modular homes to cut costs.
Right, and immigration, that economic crutch.
The suggestion is to rebalance it. Move away from just focusing on the sheer number of arrivals towards prioritizing skills that are actually needed, ensuring immigration supports the economy optimally without overloading infrastructure. Quality over just quantity.
Okay.
And finally, perhaps most crucial, boosting productivity. That involves embracing things like AI and automation much more widely, but also fundamental education reform to make sure the workforce has the skills for this future economy.
So quite a list. It sounds like Australia's at a crossroads. We've explored how this seemingly prosperous nation faces these deep structural issues, relying too heavily on property and resources, wages stagnating, an aging population looming. And the choice based on these sources seems pretty clear. Keep going down the current path towards potential stagnation, that rich country, poor people scenario, or make some big, bold changes.
That seems to be the core tension highlighted.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, to chew on is this. Considering these really deep challenges and the kinds of solutions being proposed, how does any country strike that difficult balance?
Yeah.
How do you balance the temptation of short-term economic boosts against the need for long-term sustainable prosperity that actually benefits everyone?
It's a fundamental question, really, not just for Australia, but for many nations grappling with similar pressures in the 21st century.
Mhm.
A lot to think about.